Good evening, everyone. We are going to be starting our office hours bonus presentation in just a few moments while we let more of our attendees in. So sit tight and we'll be back shortly. All right, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our bonus session of office hours. My name is Erin Sidrovich. I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement at Oakland University, and I'm so excited to bring you tonight's session. As many of you know, our office hours virtual series is co-presented by the Center for Civic Engagement, the OU Alumni Association, and our Professional and Continuing Education Department. And this semester so far, we've been really excited to provide some hybrid opportunities where we've been able to get together in person as well as virtually. But tonight's bonus session is an entirely virtual program, and we're very excited to bring you a couple of special guest speakers tonight. Just a quick housekeeping reminder to please go ahead and input your questions in the Q&A feature of our Zoom webinar tonight. And also, I would like to go ahead and bring on out our moderator, John Stoll, who's an alum from the class of 2000 from our history program. He is here to moderate our session and introduce our speakers. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Erin. Pleased to be part of this again. Thank you very much, Dave and company, for asking me to, and Erin, of course, asking me to help out. I'm going to give a little bit of a background to each of our panelists today, and then we'll jump right into a discussion about what happened yesterday, and importantly, what is going to happen in the future. So we're going to put a little bit of rear view mirror out there and then some crystal ball and see if it makes a nice brew. I am John Stoll. I am a proud alum of Oakland University. I continue to be very involved with the College of Arts and Sciences, and I teach journalism, if that's what you can call it. Yes, my students. I teach journalism as an adjunct faculty member. My day job is to consult CEOs on media strategy. I spent 20 years in journalism, including the last 13 at the Wall Street Journal. So we can have those discussions offline if you have any complaints about my alma maters, including the Wall Street Journal. Adrian Hemond is the CEO of Grassroots Midwest. He is at the he founded the firm in 2013 after acquiring a broad range of experience in politics. A former political science instructor at Saginaw Valley State University, go Cardinals. Hemond was chief of staff to the House Minority Leader in 2013 and he served as a lobbyist with governmental consultant services from 2007 to 2012, specializing in appropriations, local government, regulatory affairs, and procurement. Prior to GCSI, Hemond was lead staff to the Michigan House Appropriations Committee under then Chairman Representative George Cushenberry, as well as staff to Representative Marcia Cheeks. He is also a former account executive with Energy Systems Group, an energy performance contractor. He holds a BA and MA from Michigan State University, both in political science, and he is a master of mixed martial arts, so don't mess with him. John Sellek is founder and CEO of Harbor Strategic, a Michigan-based public affairs and PR firm with offices in Lansing and Southeast Michigan. John has been ranked by the Capital Insider Survey as one of Lansing's most effective public affairs professionals. John's PR and political skill set is based on his experience advising 2 Michigan speakers of the House, serving in a governor's policy shop, and leading communications for 2 state attorneys general, all of which gave him true understanding of how public policy and legal issues impact the real lives of families and businesses. In addition to the government service, John led efforts on multiple statewide political campaigns, serving as manager of a winning race for Michigan Attorney General and an advisor to victorious campaigns on the GOP gubernatorial nomination and the Michigan Secretary of State. John also selected as state director of Mitt Romney's presidential campaign and worked on President George W. Bush's Washington, D.C. based inaugural committee. We'll play a drinking game. He is going to mention Chris Christie at some point, and when it happens, you have to take a shot. Adrian and John unabashedly comprise baldly bipartisan. I don't know if you noticed, but there's a little bit of a contrast here. In an era that sees politics and public policy discussions today feel anything but civil, they take a humorous and bipartisan look at politics for organizations around the state. This is amazing, but baldly bipartisan shows people can have fun with politics, be cordial, and actually get away from it without any blood being drawn. Dave Dulio is our spiritual director here. He is the author and finisher of these sessions. If you know anything about Dave or you've been following along, he is a professor in the political science department and director of Oakland's Center for Civic Engagement. He teaches courses on campaigns and elections, Congress, political parties, interest groups, and other areas of American politics. As a former member of the media, he is often called upon by national media and international media to talk about what we're talking about tonight, what is going on. Dave has published 13 books, the 2 most recent being Under the Iron Dome, Congress from the Inside in Cases in Congressional Campaigns, Split Decision. He has written dozens of articles and book chapters on subjects ranging from the role of professional consultants in U.S. elections to campaign finance. Dave is also a former American Political Science Congressional Fellow on Capitol Hill. So let's start with Dave and see how everyone wants to answer this question. What are the biggest takeaways from Election Day? We talked a week ago. A lot of the things that we thought might happen didn't happen. A lot of the things that predicted were going to happen did happen. So some surprises and some status quo. What are your big takeaways?
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks for being here. Thanks for doing this. And a big thanks to Adrian and the other John for coming in as our first ever guest speakers in office hours. And for those of you who may be new to these sessions, we like to think of these as students going to office hours with their professor. And we sometimes bring in guest speakers, so why not? And I also want to thank them for their work in Baldly Bipartisan, because they are really great models of being able to see things from different political points of view, but do it in a fun and engaging way. So they're great models of behavior. If all Democrats and Republicans could get along as well as John and Adrian, we'd be in great shape. To answer your question, John Stoll, I'll keep it brief. I think the biggest takeaway for me, it applies to Michigan and the rest of the country, is candidates matter. We have plenty of examples from across the country where bad candidates lost yesterday. Many of them, frankly, were endorsed by former President Trump. And those decisions by certainly the president to endorse these folks and Republicans to nominate them as their candidates for the general election held down Republican possibilities and gains that were across the country, and I think here in Michigan as well. I would also say too, for us in Michigan, I think many people underestimated the importance of the abortion issue on the ballot yesterday in terms of driving turnout and affecting results. And I'll be interested to hear what Adrian and John have to say.
Sure. I think you're spot on in terms of candidates mattering. The abortion issue was clearly a lot more salient than folks thought it was going to be, particularly, with some of the sort of questionable polling that we saw down the stretch that depicted a closer race than it was, and abortion as a less salient issue. I think the other thing that's very clear from what happened in Michigan and a number of other states around the country is that money matters a lot as well. The result in Michigan was in great part powered by the massive financial advantage that Democrats enjoyed. Some of that relates back to what Dave said, right, to candidate quality. People who give money to political campaigns in, at any sort of with any sort of regularity and donations of any sort of size, they're investors in the political process, and they didn't like what they were seeing from a lot of Republican candidates and declined to give them money, including a lot of traditional Republican funders, and that cost them at the ballot box for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all those things, and certainly the extent to which abortion not only impacted, but it lasted a long time. That may sound silly when you think about the seriousness of the topic and how important it is to people. But in politics and in America, basically, we don't have to look at anything longer than 6 seconds, except for this webinar. You need to be on here the entire time. But if you're on TikTok, which I can be scrolling away, 1 second, I don't like that, I'm going to the next thing. And the Democrats didn't have any other issues to use. The Republicans and President Trump and the Supreme Court gave them the one they needed. And they stayed on it for 6 months, and they figured out how to ride it and keep it from getting disinteresting or boring or just flat taking the edge off from it to the extent that it wouldn't work. Another thing I think I take away as a little bit of a surprise yesterday, and I think the GOP has to learn a lesson about this, is that we usually operate on historical precedent to a large extent. It's not like we don't innovate in politics, but we certainly look at the past. And normally in a presidential mid-year, it would be good enough to take an unpopular president, put their face here, put Dave's face there, and there's suddenly one person. That didn't happen in this election. For whatever reason it is, I tend to think it's because Biden has struggled so mightily despite being what was generally considered a likable, regular sort of guy. He was the target. He took all the blame for inflation. Not only did voters separate themselves from blaming Gretchen Whitmer and state level candidates for it, they even figured out how to separate congressional federal candidates like Hillary Scholten and Alyssa Slotkin. I mean, if you watch any of the Alyssa Slotkin ads, and not that you had a choice, you had to, because they were everywhere. Ask my high school kids on YouTube. It was all Biden and Slotkin. It wasn't Slotkin voted for A, Slotkin did B. It was mostly just, here, let me slap these two people together, and that's going to damage, and it didn't work. And that's going to be something that's sort of like one of the bigger surprises for me. It's credit to voters, to be honest.
Look, if I could follow up on that's interesting, because I was thinking as mainly the governor was making the argument. She did it during the debates. She did it during some other instances right on the trail that, hey, I can't fix inflation. Mm-hmm. And so do you think voters bought that? Because to me, it kind of sounded like a cop-out or an excuse, right? That, or passing the buck maybe is the better way to put it. Do you think that worked?
Yeah, I think it did. And I think John pointed to an interesting dynamic. I was thinking about how to describe it while he was talking. The president was essentially a rodeo clown for Democrats this cycle.
Adrian, I'm trying to come up with I was going to say, distraction, look over here.
He was a rodeo clown for Democrats, and Democrats figured that dynamic out quicker than the president did. Every other Democrat, myself included, had figured out, a year ago that the president was deeply unpopular. He was like the last to know. But they all started running away from him at a pretty good clip and making a conscious effort to differentiate themselves from Joe Biden. And Gretchen Whitmer was honestly one of the first in line, right, to make a point of keeping her distance from the president,
Right.
knowing she was going into his first midterm election, which is traditionally wretched for the president's party, whoever the president is, and knowing that the president was deeply unpopular. It's like, all right, old man, you can take all the slings and arrow. I got an election to win.
And, I think to some extent, the Democrats learned this a little bit, at least in the Virginia governor's race last year, that you couldn't just put Trump on the screen and put Glenn Youngkin up and say he was toast, that the personality of the candidate actually mattered. The quality of the candidate actually mattered. And it didn't really stick. And if they didn't get the abortion issue, it's kind of a waste of time to say what if, but I do like to think about it. If Dobbs didn't happen, what would the Dems have done? They still were going to run a campaign that said, we're kind of normal, we're nonpartisan, we just solve problems. And oh, by the way, that person over there is completely insane. And here's how I prove it. They look like Donald Trump. They didn't have to do that. They were completely actually relieved from doing that, other than maybe the John Gibbs situation where it was really effective. They were able to just talk about abortion the whole time, and that was effective.
John, you had mentioned one of the big surprises for you, Adrian, Dave. Any other thoughts here on things that really were kind of, you took a step back and said, I didn't really think that was going to happen? Well,
I mean, to be honest, the Republicans losing both houses in the Michigan legislature was fairly shocking to me. We kind of had the scuttlebutt around town that it was the Senate that was sort of at risk. We could narrow it down to only 4 or 5 seats. It's pretty easy to tell which ones they were because they were on television. They were actually spending a lot of money, especially down where Oakland is in the Detroit market, on the Hertel Hornberger race, on the McDonald Kleinfeld race, even on the Camilleri race in Downriver. There was a ton of money. You could tell the House is a lot trickier. They're on cable. You can't watch it from Lansing. You can't see what's happening. And it seems like there was a lot more seats they had to win. And they actually had a lot more incumbents to protect, and they did that.
Yeah, I was surprised how quickly the lake effect kicked in for Democrats. It was clearly the intent of the redistricting commission to draw lakeshore districts to create more competitive districts. And I was skeptical, particularly in the House, but sort of skeptical in general, that Democrats would be able to fully capitalize on that in the first election cycle coming out of this novel redistricting process that we had in Michigan. And Democrats really overperformed compared to what I think expectations were in those lakeshore districts, whether it was in Traverse City or it was the Southwest Michigan Lakeshore House District, where Joey Andrews prevailed over Kevin Whiteford, whose wife is a current state representative, or whether it was now Senator-elect Kevin Hertel in the Lakeshore District around Lake St. Clair. There is, going forward, there's going to be a durable relationship between Democrats and water. They did really, really well the more water there was. It's probably second only to proximity to an institution of higher learning in predicting how likely people are to vote for Democrats.
Yeah, I think the both state legislative chambers flipping to Democratic control, and we can get into the meaning of that and the possibilities for that, I think, a bit later. But that was not expected. But heck, there was a bunch that wasn't expected, right? I mean, I'll throw out one thing: John James just eking by in the 10th congressional is shocking, actually, in what I thought is a Republican county these days. And add that that Gretchen Whitmer carried Macomb County is stunning to me. For me, that's kind of where that the issue of abortion comes in again. I think those early ads that the Whitmer campaign and its allies just hammered Dixon did two things in my eyes. One, it defined Tudor Dixon before she could define herself to anybody. And two, energize that Democratic base that I think sort of we ended up with this a rising tide lifts all boats in terms of voter turnout, right? Where some of these folks who came out to vote because of Prop 3 may not have been planning to vote previously, but came out, voted for 3, and then voted for Democrats all the way up and down the ballot.
I think that's right. And I think the dynamic actually goes a little bit deeper than that. Prop 3 outran Governor Whitmer, who won in a huge blowout. Prop 3 performed even better than the governor, which means that there is a sizable number of Republicans who voted for Tudor Dixon, but also voted for Prop 3. And so we're going to be unpacking the impact of Prop 3 for years, I think. Obviously, we don't even have full election results yet. We haven't really had a chance to go back and comb through the qualified voter file and figure out who all these people are. But that's all coming, and we'll be analyzing it for years.
Do you, I guess we're sort of saying, I mean, already that this abortion issue probably was the big driver. I mean, if it seems to have been, and I'm wondering if it's also a driver of the voter turnout that we saw. With these numbers were just historically high for a midterm. They went, in favor of Whitmer. They went in favor of Prop 2 or Prop 3, and not only in favor, right, but in an age when we're used to counting every last vote in every state, Whitmer, her margin seems definitive, and Prop 3's margin seems definitive. And I mean, there's other races in the state as well. Some were closer than we expected, but on those two issues, 55%, 56% feels definitive in this era. What are you making of that, and the voter turnout and abortion's role, and what other things might have also played a role in driving the turnout and the definitive nature of the results?
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry, John. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, there's no question about it anymore. We're looking at the numbers of it. And like Adrian said, Prop 3 outran the governor. And what does that mean? I just looked at a chunk of counties. If you look at like a super Democrat county bordering on communism, like Washtenaw County, the governor got 71% there. That's like, what? That's a big county. And Prop 3 got 73. So it outdid her by 2 points. So it pushed even more people. Whatever the 4 Republicans that still live in Ann Arbor, they also voted there. And if you switch over to like where I live in Livingston County, next door to Oakland, pretty solid red place. You walk around here, there's Trump flags all over the place. Whitmer got a respectable 43%. She actually outran Alyssa Slacken, who did fine at 40. For Livingston, Whitmer got 43, Prop 3 got 49. So +6 in a place like Livingston. That issue cut through the clutter and made a major difference. And it's going to be the data bonanza. Figure out who all those people are and what splits their issues and who they might be voting for next is going to be so important.
Yeah, and in a place like Livingston, right? Can Trump or DeSantis better target them with messages in 2023 and early 24? I think and maybe to put it another way, the fact that I think everybody was prepared for a really late night in terms of counting and calls that were coming, right? We would expect them late into the night, and the big ones were early. I mean, before midnight, and that to me signaled, boy, Republicans are going to have a tough election day when you're calling some of these races that are supposed to be close relatively early in the evening.
Yeah, that's right.
Just add in there real quick. The House GOP led by Matt Hall and the Senate GOP led by Eric Nesbitt, who would have been the majority leader and speaker had they won. They ran great operations. They raised all the money. They fought tooth and nail on candidate recruitment. In some instances, they're impacted negatively by Trump endorsements and things like that. But still, overall, as a whole, they did pretty well. And had the top of the ticket been solidified in some way, they would have been in a lot better shape despite the abortion issue that they were dealing with, because so many of these seats were drawn 50-50 and some of these seats were really close. I think 400 votes. Is it each, Adrian, and the 2 Macomb Senate seats, at least in one of them, it was that close. And so they could have had the majority had the top of the ticket been better. Frankly, I even think maybe Nessel would have gotten through with a much lower Whitmer margin, but Whitmer helped carry Nessel across. She was the weakest of the big 3. There's a million reasons we can talk about, I think, but nonetheless, Whitmer really carried those guys across and then did the Senate and House Democrats a massive favor.
Yeah, the only thing I take issue with what John said is I do think that the House had some, I don't even want to say misses in candidate recruitment. It was sort of an artifact of how the election cycle played out, right? So filing deadlines in April for these offices. And at the beginning of this year, the enthusiasm was 100% all on the Republican side, right? They were fired up. They were mad at the president, who was really unpopular. You know, inflation's running rampant through the economy, and Republicans are fired up, not just to vote, but to file for office. And in a lot of instances, Republicans got the wrong candidate through primaries. That dynamic was a lot more pronounced in the Michigan House, and we obviously saw it play out for Congress in the 3rd Congressional District with an assist from some skullduggery from the National Democrats. But that dynamic kind of played out all over the state, and there were some seats in the House where a better Republican candidate, which frequently was on offer in those primaries, may well have prevailed against the tide here, because a lot of these races were so close. The flip side of that is, in a lot of these races, the GOP was kind of screwed no matter what, because of the collapse at the top of the ticket, right? This turned out to be the worst night for the Michigan GOP in modern history, right? They will control nothing in the state come January. No Supreme Court majority, no state Senate, no state House, none of the 3 statewide offices. They got completely blown out. When the votes are finally done being counted, it looks like the governor is going to win by 10. And the way that the redistricting commission drew those maps, I don't care who the governor is. If an incumbent governor gets reelected by 10 in Michigan under those maps, they're taking both chambers.
Well, and that's really the difference between 18 and 22. I worked on the Schuette campaign in 18. He lost by 9.5 points or whatever it was to Whitmer. It was, after 8 years of Rick Snyder and Republicans, it was the year of the woman. They had an all-woman female ticket, very smart. But the legislature held on, but that's because it was under the maps that they drew. So redistricting had a massive impact in a year where there were no maps to protect anybody. Instead, the maps were drawn to be competitive. It's just that we all thought they wouldn't be competitive for 2 more years or 4 more years. Down the road, it just happened to be that this was a different year than what everybody thought at the beginning.
So, and let me ask you guys this: the Voters Not Politicians folks who were behind the ballot initiative that created the redistricting commission, they tout that they ended gerrymandering. But I heard one of you say that these districts were drawn to be 50-50. So that to me screams gerrymandered. When a district is drawn to produce a certain result, that's gerrymandering. Am I wrong about that? And or did the Voters Not Politicians folks, did they really end gerrymandering?
I'm gonna take it a step further than that. It wasn't just a gerrymander; it was a racial gerrymander, right? This was a racial gerrymander that the redistricting commission did. In the parlance of redistricting lawsuits, back when Democrats filed them in Michigan instead of Republicans, we called this cracking, right? Which is that you carve up the major central cities where the Democrats like me live, and you fling them out into suburban and exurban areas and rural areas where the Republicans live to create districts that are 50-50 or as close to it as you can get. And that's what happened here, right? And largely as a result of that, come January, there will be 1 Black Detroiter in the Michigan State Senate, right? That's how you get a maximum number of competitive districts in the state legislature, is that you crack cities. And they didn't just do it to Detroit. They did it to the city of Grand Rapids. Hell, they did it to the city of Livonia, right? The city of Livonia, where John's mother-in-law is from, is now in 5 state house districts. Livonia is not that big, right? But it is trending blue. It's an educated, affluent area. And so you got to crack it and put it with some Republicans in order to make competitive districts.
Yeah, and that's why we saw the entirety of most of Kent County become represented by Democrats for the first time, because they cracked those things. In the past, when the GOP wrote it, they packed all those Democrats into 2 seats in the city of Grand Rapids, and then they took all the suburbs around it. Now I like to say it was kind of like a pizza, sliced outward. The tip of every piece had a big chunk of the city of Grand Rapids, which is as blue as Lake Michigan. And now we see every one of those seats go the other way. So only the very northern part, Kent County is kind of like larger in an odd way. The northern part and the very southern part remained represented by Republicans, but the 5 seats in the middle, for the first time, all went Democrat.
I want to take a question from Rob Track on the Q&A here, and I'm going to try to break it down a little bit here, because I think Prop 3 was something that some of us, I've sat there and wondered for my whole life, if we took this to the people and let the people vote on the issue of abortion, what would they say? And one of the things Rob points out is there are provisions in Prop 3, at least the way it was, the opponents framed it as being extremely out of touch with most people and the way they view abortion, such as late term. And yet it takes this overwhelming victory. I mean, what do we learn about people's general views of the issue? And maybe they just want to put to bed whether or not it's available, and or they are not paying attention to the nuances in the bill. Because I think, Dave, we talked last week about how effectively the no vote was positioned to say it's too extreme and it's confusing. Well, the extremeness of it and the confusing nature of it sure didn't stop people from voting yes.
Yeah, I think that's
I think that's true. But I think if you were to ask people, are you for or against, and had it as a yes or no, I think you would see more people say that they're pro-choice than the ballot initiative got in terms of voter percentage. I think the messaging from the no side of Prop 3 was pretty effective, because they didn't say we don't want abortion. They said we want to have it be, or we think that this particular language is too confusing and too extreme. I think they tried to just sort of thread the needle and maybe have it not both ways, but to not come out against it as in concept, but against this writing of it.
Yeah, I think I think that was clearly what they were trying to do. I think where that strategy missed a little bit is ultimately abortion, like every other issue in American politics right now. The winner is the one who can seem less weird, the one who can seem the most normal, right? And it's pretty clear that while most people have some very ambivalent feelings about abortion, most people do not want to ban it. And the problem for the opponents in the way that they set this messaging up of it being too confusing and too extreme is what the alternative was, right? Which particularly in most people's view, where this was going to be a close election and, probably the governor would win, but maybe not. The other option that was on offer was the 1931 law in Michigan that's on the books. And so given the option between passing Prop 3 and reverting to the 1931 law and potentially having that enforced by Republican elected officials, the latter seemed like the more extreme option to people. And so I think that was kind of a messaging miss from opponents, particularly leaning into the extreme part. The confusing part, okay, fine. But I actually think that they set up a contrast that didn't work all that well for them because of the 1931 law that was on the books. I think that if there hadn't been that law on the books, that they would have gotten a lot more traction out of that message, particularly with Roman Catholics. I think that they misread their audience there quite a bit. I mean, I am a Roman Catholic. I've come from a giant family of Roman Catholics, like most families of Roman Catholics. And, most American Roman Catholics, it's clear, from public opinion polling over 30 years, they don't like abortions, but they don't want to ban abortions.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, Adrian.
Whoa.
Then we can stop right there. Now, is this the final word since it's being written in the Constitution, or will this continue to be an election day battle or some other way in the courts?
It's going to be a attorney full-time employment act times 70,000.
So for our young Oakland Grizzlies who haven't decided what to go into,
yes,
avenue of law.
Law
What about the other two proposals? Anything to learn from that? I mean, do you think that the voting rights is gonna have any major turnout? Did it get people out? The threat of changing it, did it get people out, or it will put proposal one, the term limit and transparency, will that help one party over the other? What other learnings about these other two proposals that kind of were in the background but were important?
Yeah.
Well, I'll say on two, if 3 hadn't been there, 2 would have been the controversial one, right? Where we would have seen much more arguing between the pro and the anti, right?
Two being positioned as the voting rights.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, and partly the reason that what Dave says is true is that the sales job on Prop 1 was one of the more effective pieces of political subterfuge that I can remember seeing in Michigan politics in, the 20-something years I've been doing this. They did a really, really good sales job packing that with enough anti-politician stuff and this sort of hide the ball maneuver they did where they reduced the total number of years you could theoretically serve, even though almost no one actually makes it the full 14. And so now you can do 12 and mix and match them between one chamber, which functionally means doing 12 years in the House or in the Senate. So they managed to both lengthen term limits while tricking a large number of voters into thinking they were shortening them. And they sort of, put some mascara and some lipstick on that pig with some purported transparency measures. It was really, really effective when, I do think Prop 2 is going to have some pretty wide-ranging implications that barely got discussed during the campaign because most people viewed it as largely ministerial, which it wasn't. It's a license to print money for political consultants, which I'm obviously in favor of.
Yeah, that's for sure. Every time we see one of these good government reforms, particularly Prop 2 and the voting rights, it's really like the baby or the offspring of 2018's ballot initiative that created the Citizen Redistricting Council. It's just like they keep testing how many more things can we dress up like we're helping voters, so they're just going to check yes. It's just so common sense. So first they made it so you didn't have to lie anymore about being out of town with your AV ballot. Now they just jumped way ahead and said there's going to be 9 days of early voting. The only thing that does is it doesn't create new voters, I don't think. It means the parties are going to completely alter the way that they organize and try to get people's votes in the bank, is how we call it there. And that's going to cost a whole lot more money. Now, what my kid, I guess smarter than I thought, said this morning is, well, does that mean they're going to close my school for 9 days? That would be awesome. I don't have the rules on that one, but just like the Citizen Redistricting Council and their reforms caused a bazillion more dollars to be forced into campaigns because of the way the districts were redrawn. I mean, just look at the Slacken-Barrett race. It was the most expensive congressional race in America. I mean, between all of them, it's like approaching $50 million. It's nuts for Michigan. 9 early days of voting is creating a whole brand new gigantic mechanism that both parties have no choice but to adapt to and try to thrive with to get it done. It's going to take a lot more money. Prop 3 and Prop 2, the voting rights and the abortion issue, I saw is a little bit different than 1. They were both driven by national issues, and they were kind of riding the train of national issues. 2 is really responding to this threat to this democracy and saying that the elections didn't count and all this stuff, so let's lock down your vote and protect it. 3 is obvious over there. You got to get a lot of credit to Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan. I think he was really the driving force initially behind Prop 1 and the term limits change. He's expressed a lot of frustration, as if a lot of other people, about how fast people show up in Lansing. They're instantly going, okay, I got to be out of here before I know it. Where can I go next? I'm going to jump up to Senate. I'm going to get a job over here as a lobbyist. What else can I do? So the alteration theoretically make it easier to stay in your job and just do it for a little while longer instead of bailing all the time and having a new speaker every 15 minutes. That could turn out to be true. That could work. There's no guarantee to it. But he picked some really good timing. He put together a super good team. He balanced it out partisan wise. He had Rich Studley, who used to run the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. He had former House Speaker, Republican Jace Bolger, who works a lot with the DeVos family. And then he had the Dem side working together, and they all wanted to make that happen. And Adrian nailed it. I would have been even more vicious personally if I was running it. You're going to say all these politicians don't expose their finances. We don't know where their conflicts of interest are. And these days, it's not a surprise. People don't trust anybody, and they don't trust anything. So they sure don't trust politicians. So you let them know they're going to have to be forced to crack open their checking account and show us what they're doing with all their money and who's paying them. That sounds pretty good. And then also you do the sleight of hand part where you're like, oh, we're slicing their term limits by 2 years. Yeah, that sounds good. They just don't really explain the rest. But it passed with flying colors in a way that I think most people didn't expect. Fixing quote unquote term limits has been a dream of the Lansing establishment for a long time. And oh my goodness, it's just another surprise this year. It's going to happen.
And John, Michigan was out of step with the transparency issue, right? I mean, Michigan was one of a few states where you couldn't find out where the money was coming from.
Yeah, when I worked for Attorney General Mike Cox and he was running for governor back 1,000 years ago. It was one of his primary things. We were saying the same thing then. They were using the same third-party group that would say that Michigan ranked last in transparency. Nothing had changed at all. You know what? Surprisingly, the people who would be expected to follow those rules didn't want to implement them. So they had to go around and do it this way as part of the trade for fixing the amount of years they're in office.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, you know, on the Prop 2 question, because I do think that got ignored in this whole debate a lot, the sort of public debate around the ballot proposals. One of the things that I think is important to focus on is the not just potential, but the likely unintended consequences here. You know, and Republicans have some experience with this in loosening up the rules around nonprofits, AKA dark money, which they did several years ago, and is a big part of the way that the Democrats just beat them last night, was by being able to marshal unlimited, unreported expenditures via 501c4 nonprofits. You're going to see a similar phenomenon that's actually going to leverage those previous unintended consequences on Prop 2, because those same, you know, dark money nonprofit groups, as long as they're not encouraging you to vote for a particular candidate, they're just encouraging you to exercise the franchise. They can go out and engage in all of these tactics now around things like drop boxes and the 9 days of early voting. And you don't have to report where that money's coming from. As long as you target those voters correctly and you already know in advance how they're going to vote, not only can you spend 501c4 money on that, you can actually spend money, tax deductible money, through charities to turn people out to vote now, based on Prop 2 passing during that 9-day window. Or you can organize parties and drive people out to the drop box with their ballot completed. So we really did open up a lot of unintended consequences there. And I actually think Republicans are pretty well positioned to take advantage of some of that, you know, through some of their traditional church networks and things like that that have really powered Republican campaigns in the past. I think they may get the drop on Democrats with that.
So is this going to be another one of those instances where a proposition passes and then a few years down the road, people go, wait a minute, what the heck happened? I didn't think this was what was meant by that. And oh my gosh, if I'd have known that, I wouldn't have voted for it.
Yeah, governing by plebiscite is bad. Ask my friends in California where I grew up. It's no bueno.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that Mark Zuckerberg's a popular dude, but you know, they put in there that private groups can give money to clerks to run elections because that's what Zuckerberg was doing. I think those folks that probably could like hold their nose and say, fine, but it's helping elections. If they found out Donald Trump and Steve Bannon were the ones driving truckloads of cash up to the local clerk, they might like, wait a second, how is that going to work? That's another one of those things that's packed in there. I just won't be surprised now that we've seen basically 2 cycles in a row where friendly sounding election reform passes like by 1,000%, that they won't come back for more. They'll just take a way bigger bite on whatever is the next reform they decide that creates it wants to implement.
I want to get to Sandy's question in a little bit. Sandy Burgess asked a great question. First, because he came up, I mean, he always comes up, Trump. I mean, if I was thinking about tying my wagon to him the way that Tudor Dixon did, for instance, or, you know, I know other candidates successfully did it. It seemed to be a mixed results. Now, you had alluded to earlier, the top of the ticket could have been stronger ex-Trump, I'm sure. It sounds to me like we're in agreement that Tudor wasn't the strongest candidate. But outside of Tudor Dixon, I mean, it's definitely true that we saw a lot of results in the United States yesterday that seemed to indicate that maybe the Trump brand isn't as strong as the Trump brand thought it was. Meanwhile, Ron DeSantis has this kind of, you know, lovely moment that 2 years from now is going to feel like light years, you know, in the rearview mirror. So what do we make of the national scene for the GOP? We didn't see the red wave the way we thought we would. Definitely Michigan was a big disappointment for the GOP. So with these two lead horses that a lot of people think, you know, are Trump and DeSantis, and then others, you know, we would and not have time to mention probably all the people. Where do things sit for the GOP in terms of the national stage? What needs to happen next if they want to repair their game, get some control back, and try to get the White House back? Is Trump completely out of the picture, or what are we looking at?
Well, Trump's controlling everything, to be honest. And you mentioned it. His candidates all across the country, J.D. Vance won. Herschel Walker's going to the runoff. the thread that I saw through a lot of the people that he picked, and it's a trend in the GOP because we seem to like outsiders. Rick Snyder was an outsider. He just wasn't picked by Donald Trump, and he could write a $6 million check. So that really made him effective in that primary. Tudor Dixon couldn't write a $6 million check. Carrie Lake couldn't write a $6 million check. Strangely, J.D. Vance couldn't seem to write a $6 million check, and only begrudgingly did Dr. Oz start forking out his own cash. These outsider candidates who didn't run for office before, who never built up a giant network of donors and friends and favors, it's hard if you only require an endorsement to get over the hump in a primary, and then the general starts. And it's not like, here, take your time, figure out how to set up your operation, find some donors, come up with your policy agenda. It's like, boom, the race is on. That's what happened to Tudor Dixon. She didn't have any of that infrastructure in place. She wasn't ready to raise money or any of those things. She never had that infrastructure even in the primary. And the Trump endorsement put her over the top. And then you end up having to take August and September. That's 2/3 of the campaign to figure out how to get your operation going. Now, she did peak as far as her campaign goes at the right time. Toward the end, she raised $7 million in total. That helps. But we saw similar things in all these races where the folks that Trump picked were automatically the strongest. And for example, Dr. Oz to have lost now to Fetterman after the stroke, after the horrendous debate performance, all that stuff, it puts a dent in his brain. But he already knew, he felt the pressure of other people in the movement that he basically, I won't say he created it, but he sure did accelerate it and make it much bigger and give it a brand. That's what he's good at. Others are like, okay, my turn. Thank you. You're our founding father. Now let me do this. And Ron DeSantis is obviously the best example. I think if Carrie Lake wins, she thinks that she should be president, and she's pretty talented on TV. There's a lot of others. Ted Cruz was in Michigan campaigning for John Gibbs. He did not come here because he and John Gibbs are old drinking buddies. He wants to run for president badly. Still, for some reason, he's been slapped around so many times. I'm not sure why. He still wants to do that. But this bad election performance, and get your shot glass ready, is really the door opening. If there was going to be a door opener for Ron DeSantis to say, all right, I'm just going to do this, it's now, because he can make the argument to donors, which he's already pretty well connected with, and to probably a decent chunk of the grassroots. You don't even have to dislike Donald Trump. You don't even have to say he's a bad guy anymore. It's just, he did awesome. It's time to move on. Let me take the reins here and run with this thing. And he seems to be holding back. And I think when I was on the Romney campaign in 2012, the person that had all the momentum and the fire who didn't run was Chris Christie, the governor of New Jersey. He even was a bigger star at the convention in person than Mitt Romney was in many ways. And he decided, no, I'm not quite ready for this. I just became governor. I'll get ready for the next time. Well, guess what? It's hard to be a star in politics forever. And he lost his way and he crashed and burned. And now he's begging to be on, ABC Sunday shows and volunteers endorsement and come into Michigan and do a free event. He just doesn't, it passed.
He actually wanted to be on office hours tonight. We said
I know he's listening. And so to me, if I were giving unsolicited advice to DeSantis, you might think, I don't want to have to run against Trump and lose. This is your time. He's never going to be hotter than he is right now. And he's never going to get a better opportunity than a completely unexpected destruction of the GOP in a major election.
I think you're right, but I think the factor that hasn't been talked about enough, over the last 2 years since he's been out of office, and that I think people really need to focus on after this performance by the GOP in Michigan and nationally, is the former president's cupidity, right? The money's all flowing to Mar-a-Lago. And it's a huge problem for the GOP. John mentioned that Tudor Dixon, to take the Michigan example, didn't have any infrastructure coming out of the primary, and she was flat broke, her campaign. The former president could have fixed that if he wanted to. It wouldn't have taken a whole lot of money to get the Dixon campaign up and running post-primary, while the governor and her outside allies were defining Tudor Dixon as the rape and incest lady, right? Which went really, really badly for her. But it's not just in Michigan, right? Yes, the former president picking these celebrity candidates was bad, right? But the money's all ending up in Mar-a-Lago. They shouldn't have had to spend any money to win a Georgia Senate race, not a dollar. But they nominated Herschel Walker, and now they're going to a runoff. They shouldn't have had to spend a dollar to beat John Fetterman before he had a stroke. But they nominated Dr. Oz, and now they're neck deep in that race, for millions and millions of dollars. and they lost. And yet, precious little of the hundreds of millions of dollars that Donald Trump has raised since he left office has ended up in the coffers of GOP candidates while they're getting slaughtered at the ballot box. So I do agree with John that, this is Ron DeSantis's moment to try and do this, but you have to crack the fundraising nut. He did a great job fundraising, for his reelection as governor of Florida, but those national dollars, those small dollar donations, they're all going into Mar-a-Lago right now. And he has to crack that nut fast if he wants to beat Donald Trump for the GOP nomination.
Well, luckily he doesn't look too far away.
Yeah.
I think another interesting thing to watch is what the grassroots do. What do the folks that are Trump supporters or were Trump supporters, are they fed up enough with losing and missing opportunities to themselves move on from Trump and say, okay, I was with you, Mr. President, but now you're costing us control of the U.S. Senate, a small majority in the U.S. House. We've lost both chambers here in Michigan. We had a gubernatorial candidate that got beat by 10 points, right? That I think they only move on if they're sick and tired of losing. And we'll have to see what that looks like over the next year plus.
Yeah. I'm gonna put a quick pin in that last statement that you made and just ask a quick question about what, Dave, you alluded to this earlier, the victories in Michigan, particularly the House and Senate, the control that they have in Lansing now. What could that possibly mean over the next couple of years? What could be the net effect?
Well, I think it's interesting it'll be interesting to see what path the Democrats take, right? I mean, first time control of the Michigan Senate in 40 years. They've got unified party government. They can, if they keep their folks together, they can pass whatever the hell they want. So do they put pedal to the metal and say, boy, we gotta act now. We don't know how long this is going to last. We gotta push everything through. Or do they say, we got really thin majorities here, 1 or 2 votes, and we lose it. And by the way, some of those races that went our way were only decided by 400 votes. So maybe we got to pump the brakes a little bit. My hunch is that it's going to be more the former than the latter. But who knows? I think it's fascinating to watch how they approach this.
I think there's a third option, which is a grand tradition now in both American political parties, right? Which is policy service to the funders. That means one thing in the Republican Party, and it means a different thing in the Democratic Party. In Michigan, for the Democratic Party, what it means is that probably House Bill 1 is going to be repealing right to work, right? Because the unions power the Democratic Party in the state of Michigan, and they don't like right to work, and they have poured millions upon millions of dollars into passing redistricting reform, into capturing these legislative majorities, powering Governor Whitmer's election and then re-election, and it's time for some policy service. And so I expect that will probably be House Bill 1. It will certainly be in the governor's first State of the State speech, and I imagine that they will probably have repealed right to work by the end of Q1.
Yeah, I think it'll be the biggest challenge for Governor Whitmer that she faces coming in. She has loads of legislative experience. She was in the Senate and the House for 16 years. She knows her way around there. She was in the minority the entire time, and she didn't work for the executive. And the difference here will be she has to figure out what promises does she have to deliver on that she was just spending all of $40 million on talking about retirement tax, more money for childcare, whatever it is. That sounded like the kitchen table bread and butter issues. But the real challenge then is to rule, I don't say that in a nasty or a queen-like way or a king-like way, to rule and guide her majority so they don't get off track. Already in one of the stories tonight, because we switched from policy to politics to policy so fast, which is good because elections have consequences. Already in the Crane's Detroit Business Story tonight is the term revenge legislation, which speaks to the energy that's behind let's change right to work. Let's go in there and create a graduated income tax. Let's go in there and do X, Y, and Z, clothesline 5, damn the consequences. All those things that are pent up and saying, let's do this while we finally have the power. It's going to be Governor Whitmer's strategy decision, but then her guidance decision to try to sort of keep them in line. That's a governor's job to try to do. And that's affected, at least in part, by whether she really wants to run for president or not. That may determine how much of the more progressive agenda she goes along with versus trying to maintain her moderate kitchen table issue image.
Do you guys think? Sorry, John. Do you guys think that the revenge legislation that approach could backfire? And
Yes.
Again, another thing that both political parties are really good at is overstepping, right?
Mm-hmm.
And taking things too far and misreading the electorate, right? I mean, I think that's they got to be really careful.
Yes, I agree. The two parties are in the process of making the same mistake. Republicans are about to do it in DC, and Democrats look like they may be about to do it in Michigan, right? Which is the investigation dance, right? Republicans in DC can't wait to open investigations about Hunter Biden and about crap that happened during the Trump administration 3, 4, 5 years ago, right? And there are some Democrats that are making serious noises about Lee Chatfield investigations and like, okay, but law enforcement's investigating that. So maybe you leave that to them and actually do some of the stuff you talked about during the campaign. Because, Governor Whitmer, like, she didn't get reelected on the basis of investigating Lee Chatfield. And these people didn't get elected to the legislature on the basis of that. And if that's what they spend their time on, expect the voters to punish them for it.
Yeah, because if there are hearings at all on something like that, what's the point of doing that if you're not doing hearings? The media, God bless their souls, will be drawn to it. Like, I don't want to say something inappropriate. They're just going to be drawn to it like a magnet. How about that?
Yeah.
It's going to take full scale coverage, and it has the capability of drowning out what they're doing across the street at the governor's office in the Romney building. And that's why I think like Governor Whitmer's up for her biggest challenge. Just like you chased the dog chase car and he got it. She got it. How do you keep this all under control?
The negativity was that Sandy Burgess asks, the negativity of the ads. I mean, this is 101 politics, obviously, but it's gotten extreme, and it's gotten, in some cases, at least blamed for some of the violence going on. So, voters say that they tune this stuff out. I don't know that they do, but what can be done, if anything, what should be done? I mean, in the spirit of Dave, the center itself, to make this less enticing to candidates to use. It feels to me like if I took a drubbing on, I only double down on the negativity and I try to create my opponent as an even bigger enemy going into 2024. Is there anything that can be done to kind of to defang the negativity right now, or are we entered into another phase of just more and more, anger at one another?
No, there's nothing you can do. It works, and that's why media consultants keep making negative ads, because they work. And something about negative, we hear every election cycle, oh, this is so much worse than it was before. This is the most negative campaign in history, and that's just not true. I mean, go back to 1860 and look at what folks said about Abraham Lincoln, right? And I mean, that stuff wouldn't fly today. And I think that we lose some perspective on this too. And I would also add that politics is not the only thing that's negative, right? I mean, thank God the ads are off the TV now for the candidates, but watch the ads for internet service, for iPhone versus Android, right? There's negativity in all of those ads, right? It's our product's better than that product. That one sucks and this one's better, right? It's the same principle. I'm one who doesn't think people should necessarily be afraid of negativity. It's only negative because the opponent doesn't want you to know about it, right? That's really where it begins and ends.
Yeah, we saw some pretty extreme stuff this time. And basically with politics, like anything else, once you wear the shock value off one tactic, then you have to up it a notch. And particularly with the advent of the soft money, dark money era, no one's responsible. Nobody knows who the America Priorities, USA Priority, USA, like you just don't even know who these people are, and you can't know who they are. I mean, some of the RGA ads, the soft money ads, like featured, it was the Trump ad, it was the MAGA Inc. ad, featured a guy with a machine gun just shooting people in a car. Like that was like live on your TV screen. Your kids are watching that on YouTube. It's horrendous. But I agree with you, Dave, because the way the system's set up, it's not going anywhere.
This could be the race in Georgia. This can be what's going to happen. Whitmer staying for 4 years or going to the administration. I don't care what you do, but just give me one prediction from each of you that you think is going to stem from what happened yesterday. What's one thing you say, this is now going to happen?
I think, unfortunately, we're getting a rematch between those two old men in 2024,
Okay.
much as I hate it. Yes, unfortunately, I think we're getting a Trump-Biden rematch.
Trump-Biden rematch, okay. John?
I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to say that Joe Biden sees that the Democrats can win without him, even when he's considered, what'd you say, Adrian, the rodeo clown? People like Gretchen Whitmer, they're not proven. That's the risk. Can get in and run, and that we could see a switch at the top of the ticket.
And I'll take off
Trump
on
versus somebody else.
Sorry, what?
So Trump versus some Democrat that's not named Joe Biden.
That's right.
Okay.
Oh, so not
We could end up,
DeSantis.
I think we could easily end up and not be surprised. That'll be some Democrat and Ron DeSantis. Yeah.
I'll take a lead from that and say that Michigan has now positioned itself to get one of those early 2024 primary slots that the Democrats seem to be offering up to a number of states. So I'll say that Michigan goes in one of the first 4 slots in the primary season in 2024, and only to be made interesting if there are actually real primaries, right?
Yeah. Very interesting.
I appreciate everybody participating among the three of you. Dave, as you know, I really respect what you're doing here, and I've been very enlightened by having, colleagues of mine like Gary Gilbert, or what we did last week, which was just phenomenal in the Oakland Center, and tonight as well. So keep it up, and I really appreciate being part of it, and thanks a lot.
Thanks to you, John. Thanks to Adrian and John for doing this. You got busy guys. They're working on no sleep, like a lot of the folks in politics, and keeping them up past their bedtime, probably the day after the election. So can't thank you guys enough. Really appreciate what you do, and thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Have a good evening.
All right.
Take care.